For the ones who know safety isn't a catchphrase, it's a culture. And the ones who help make sure everyone makes it home safe. For the safety-minded who watch everyone's backs, Grainger offers supplies and solutions for every industry, as well as safety assessments and training to keep your facilities safe and your people safer. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Hi, welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, excited to have her back. If you missed her the first time she was on Heard Tell, stop what you're doing, pause this, go listen to that, and then come back because she is fantastic. Thrilled to have her back. Finesse Moreno-Rivera, accomplished criminologist. She's a Young Voices contributor. She is really, really good on this stuff, getting past the buzzwords, getting to data on things like justice, on things like criminality, on things like social justice. I'm so thrilled to have you back. Thanks for the time.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's great to be back.
All right, we're going to talk about a hard one today. We're going to talk death penalty. Can we just start with some honesty before we get into stats and figures and the emotions of all this? Let's just start with some honesty. Here's where I'm at on the death penalty. I've been trying for years to talk myself into complete abolishment of the death penalty and never wanting to have it for any reason. But every now and then you just get that person that beat their kid to death with a ball bat, or, you know, multiple serial killers with no remorse, or you got war criminal. There's always that exception that pops up and stops me just short of that. Now that war's against, I understand the flaws in our justice system. I understand the limitations of our government-run justice system. I understand they've got a whole lot of things they're not doing right, so I don't trust the process either. So that's where I'm at on it. You've got polling data. The polling numbers on death penalty are kind of coming down. Am I in the mainstream? Am I an outlier? Is there other people that feel like me, or am I just a weirdo by myself here with that kind of an honest assessment of it?
Absolutely not, Andrew. And thank you very much for your honesty. You know, what the polls are showing, and me personally, I think that a lot of us feel the same way. What we're seeing is a strong 6 out of 10 adults who favor the death penalty. However, there's a huge caveat here in that they do believe that it's not applied racially neutral, that it does not deter crime, and that it's also a huge talking point for everyone, in that they're thinking about it should be applied to the most heinous crimes, the most severe that you're thinking of. You're thinking of killers or anyone of that nature. But as we all know, that's not how it's currently being applied at this time.
Yeah, and even the way it's written into our laws, you know, there's still a federal death penalty. Some states have abolished it, like California. Some states have not, like Texas, which has put in an express lane. You know, everybody's dealing with it a little different. But even the way the law, like, you know, for example, sexual assaults and rapes are not qualified for the death penalty, even though those are some of the most heinous crimes we have. Things like that, like even if you're pro-death penalty, just the nuts and bolts of the law, the black and white of the law and the legislation to it, there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of holes, there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been updated in decades, if not longer. Just the machinations of government on how we manage our criminal justice system. Is neglect a good word here, where it's just kind of been left alone and we do all the debating, but it hasn't been maintained, upkept, and paid attention to in the proper ways? Is that fair to say too here?
I think so. I really do. And it's definitely one of those hot topics where, again, it can be very heated. But it's one of those things where, you know, we should definitely have a death penalty, but wait, I don't want to be the one who does it. I don't want to be the person who stands up and says yes or no. You know, it's really interesting too when you said neglect, because for some states who even still have a death penalty, they haven't even, executed anyone in over decades. Oregon, Pennsylvania, these types of states. So they still have the law on the books, somewhat as a just in case, but they're actually just not even using it.
Yeah, and you're writing in the Counterpunch. I say this every time somebody's on, but you really need to read this piece. It's got a ton. I think I counted 38 links in this thing. There's a ton of links, a ton of information. You need to read the whole thing, decide for yourself. We've linked to it. Make sure you go through the piece because it's way more than we're going to get to today. But when you just start stacking the data up on this stuff and you go all the way back to the colonies of the Americans and start talking about the death penalty, when you just start going through the data over and over and over again, break it down. What's a theme that you see when you see those big data sets? Because the numbers, your eyes just start moving. Did you see a theme that's consistent when you're looking at the data of the death penalty in America for the last 260 odd years?
There's quite a few themes. One can definitely say that there's a political theme. We all know the death penalty is utilized and also reinforced and brought back up depending upon our administration. Perfect example would be Trump with continuing the executions when he was in office compared to Biden, who's really slow rolling through the process as of right now, if not halting all of them. There's actually still a racial theme. There's a theme of negligence. There's a lot that's going on where it's, applied unfairly. It's completely unstandardized. I mean, when you really are looking at the data and everything stacking up, it's a bit shocking that it just seems reckless how we are applying this, and then also how we are carrying out the executions themselves.
Yeah. Finesse Moreno-Rivera joining us. Let's talk about the way we carry executions out, because this is something I don't hear people talk about very often. Look, I'm a history guy. I study history. There's been a lot of different ways to kill people when you need to kill somebody. All right. There's it's like the movie Million Ways to Die in the West. You can execute people a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things in America is we have used lethal injection pretty much exclusively, with a few very rare exceptions, for quite some time now. So we got a long data set on this. One of the inherent problems is, though, in our quest to have the most humane execution possible, we also picked one of the most complicated methods of execution possible. Like, it's not a simple process to do lethal injection, because people, they just put a needle in. No, that's not how that works. Talk about that, because at the core of when we start talking about government incompetence, or we're going to talk about the FDA part of it and the medical part of it, or we're going to talk about the morality part of it, making a more complicated way to executing people, that made a whole bunch of problems in itself. And then that just starts to really stress test all the other fractures that's in this process to begin with.
Absolutely. So, as listeners may or may not know, is the reason why we do have a death penalty and why it may not be looked at as a violation of our Eighth Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment is because our Congress looks to us, the American sample of people who are on juries, to say what our society, sees as being cruel and unusual. And to us, because we continue to lean towards the death penalty, that's why we still have it. With that being said, we're also looking at the idea of our society evolving in how we operate within executions, and just being the decency is actually the nomenclature that is utilized within the Constitution. So with that being said, you're looking and trying to execute someone in the most humane way. And so, as you can see throughout history, we have tried various different techniques, such as firing squad or gas asphyxiation or hangings. And that's where we landed with lethal injection, because it's what you just said, Andrew. You would think, okay, you just put a needle in and everything is done. However, there wasn't a lot of consideration as to how we would be able to keep up with the need for the chemicals utilized for the executions, or who would be administrating them. You think about needles, you're automatically going to think about a doctor, right? Well, you have to consider that doctors have ethical concerns, because they're here to help us, to actually give us life, not take it away. So what you see is that there are some doctors who are involved in executions, but they're not, yelling it from the rooftop or, talking about this with their colleagues. That may just be their moral and value, thinking, okay, well, if anyone should be doing it, it should be me. But what we're seeing a lot of is, with a lot of these stories, are that those who are participating in these executions are, there's plenty of autopsy reports that come out that, they're seeing multiple holes, they're missing veins. It's taking a very long time for individuals to pass because of the products that they're using aren't what they are supposed to be. As I don't want to get too far ahead here, but the main problem with lethal injection is that we actually don't have the correct medicines to use, the correct combinations in order to humanely execute someone. And in the beginning, Oklahoma, who is really out there right now in the news with a lot of their box executions, they were actually the very first individuals, or they had, a doctor who had come up with the three ingredients for performing executions. In the very beginning, the whole thought was that it would feel as though the inmate is falling asleep, so their heart is actually stopping. However, what we now know is that the three ingredients actually build up fluid within the lungs, so it makes the inmate feel as though they're drowning instead of actually just falling into a deep sleep and their heart stopping. So we also know that FDA can't regulate these substances, but I'll get to that as well. But just really quickly, because lethal injection is fraught with a lot of issues when trying to come up with these chemicals, just a few days ago, it was announced that Alabama was going to try to pursue utilizing the nitrogen asphyxia, which also was brought up by Oklahoma legislator there, based on a paper from a criminal justice professor who isn't a scientist, who isn't a medical profession, looking at nitrogen. As we know, we need oxygen to breathe. So if you replace that with nitrogen, then you're going to start to feel, it'll work as though it's gas asphyxiation, pretty much. But the paper is only based on the effects that pilots or scuba divers have experienced whenever oxygen has been taken away and they're just naturally breathing in nitrogen. So yet again, what we're seeing is, just a play on people's lives, just trying to figure out what we can do to humanly execute these individuals, when really it's just, we're just testing it as we go.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Grainger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
At Baker's Pharmacy, care is what's most convenient for you. Care is being here when you need us. We're open evenings and weekends. Care is helping you save more. Most insurance plans and discount cards are accepted at your local Baker's Pharmacy. Care is saving you time by managing your prescriptions online. You can request refills, check order status, and more. Care is convenience that works for everyone. Baker's, a world of care is in store. Services and availability vary by location. Age and other restrictions may apply. For coverage, consult your health insurance company. Visit the pharmacy or our site for details.
Yeah, Finesse Moreno-Rivera. I don't want to be macabre about it, and I don't want to be flippant about it, but let me just say it for the sake of the conversation, because this is a grown folk adult conversation about this topic. It's a tough topic. When you really get down to it, there is no humane way to kill another human being. You got to kill them. Like you have to stop them from living, whether it's in combat or whatever else. If you're going to kill somebody, you got to do it, and you got to follow it all the way through. And the problem is human anatomy and human physiology and medical science, that's going to be a little bit different for every single human person, because they chemically react to things differently. And people are tougher than some other people. And there's some medical science stuff that we just can't explain scientifically. We just can't. That part of it is where the morality of it comes in, is because you talked about the botched executions and how horrible they could be. You noted one in your piece that went over 3 hours trying to get it done. The fact of the matter is, though, how do we reconcile those two things? Because it's like, look, whether it takes 90 seconds or 90 minutes, you're still killing a human being the morality of that is something that we can't quantify in all that data set you have. So how do we deal with that part of it?
I think that's really interesting, because when it comes down to it, and I was really thinking about this and how to frame my thoughts, or even try to consider what others may be thinking when listening to this, or what others have thought, right? That, like, again, this is a very hot topic. I think that this comes down to your values and your morals. And we know that that shouldn't be a part of our criminal justice system, that truly should be apart from just looking at facts. But what it comes down to is that's what it is. We're actually saying it's okay to kill someone. And I think that a lot of people have a hard time accepting that and talking about that, because then you come into the conversation of thinking about, well, does that make me better than the person that we are executing? And at the end of the day, does it? I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Also, going back to what we're looking at, who are we executing? What have they done? Everyone's morals and values are different. And we also don't want to talk about, number one, the political lean, how these individuals are pawns. But then also, we don't talk about the religious aspect of it as well. Religion really does underscore a lot of our laws and a lot of our criminal justice system, whether we like it or not. We try to say that they're separate, but they're not. So, I think it comes down to morality and values to say that, yes, I'm okay with killing someone. And that may mean that you're not better than the person that we're executing.
Yeah. Finesse Moreno-Rivera, is the heart of the problem of this debate, though, is it's one thing to say on Twitter or Facebook or even in a courtroom, because you just mentioned the judge still says it, God have mercy on your soul when you give the death sentence. It's still in there. Isn't the core of this problem is it's one thing to say it. It's one thing to say it in the courtroom, but then some human being has to go and do that. And I really wonder when we discuss this, and I do it all the time, like somebody does something is like, yep, put them under the jail. That's a horrendous crime. And we all have that natural reaction. I wonder if it would change how we view this debate if we just skip ahead to the parts like, okay, this person has done something so bad that they need to be removed from society for the good of society. Are you willing to do the deed to get that done? Because I think that changes the whole perception on the whole thing right there.
Absolutely. So there's two things that I like to comment about that. Number one is, whenever I was referencing the poll earlier, that was from Pew Research Center. And, I'm really happy that they did include this as a caveat, that depending upon if this is an online poll or this is a phone call, that really skews how people answer and how they feel, right? I mean, that's a given. If you're talking to someone on the phone, you're definitely going to want to skew a different way compared to having that autonomy behind your computer, right behind your screen. Another thing as well is, I don't know if you follow a lot of YouTube channels, but there's one called Soft White Underbelly. Andrew, have you heard of that before?
I have one, but I've not seen the YouTube channel, no.
Okay, so Soft White Underbelly is made from, I want to say his name is Mark Leda. And what he does is he primarily operates out of California and talks to individuals on Skid Row. He talks to people who are drug addicts. He'll talk to Johns. He'll talk to pimps plus with their prostitutes. He'll talk to prostitutes. He'll talk to gang members. He'll talk to people who have been shot. He'll talk to kids who are homeless. He does follow-up on individuals. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And what's great about this channel compared to something like Intervention on A&E, which I think is completely exploitive and you really don't learn anything, is that it really shows you empathy. It shows you as a person watching, society and who an individual is. It's almost humanizing. So just yesterday, I pulled up his channel, and he had an interview with a warden / executioner. And I mean, this guy was from Alabama, very straightforward guy, seems, no whistles and bells. And, when Mark said, what does it feel like to have to execute someone? And he said, I don't lose any sleep about it. It's my job. And when the clock strikes 12, I hit that button and it's done. Because what they had was an electric chair. But the one thing that stuck with me is that he said that I I treated them as a human being up to that single point. Me and my guards, that's what we did. And he said the number one thing, and the reason why he could sleep at night, is because that he knew that that person, without a doubt, was responsible and that needed to be sentenced to death. And he said 9 times out of 10, these individuals would confess right up to the point they're walking to the chair. And I think that also is a great segue as well. We're talking about the Innocence Project, but that's a whole nother topic. But again, check that out, Soft White Underbelly. You could tell too, it wasn't something that he looked forward to, but it was something that needed to be done at the end of the day. But that was his job, right? We're not talking about people who just sign up, who just want to experience it, which I think is completely unethical. But that's also another story.
Finesse Moreno-Rivera, we're talking about the morality of it. It brings us back to what you dovetailed your piece in at the Counterpunch. Again, you need to read this whole thing because she has just stats galore and links all over this thing. It's well researched, like her stuff always is. That's why we're happy to have her on. We're talking about the morality of this. The fact of the matter is, part of the morality of being able to execute someone is, well, we followed the letter of the law. You make the law the bad guy. Okay, the court, a jury of his peers and the court and the legal system and all the appeals, we should have our hands clean in this execution because the entire justice system says this needs to happen. We can't say that with a straight face right now because the way the drugs are set up, the way the process is set up, the way the laws are set up, and you detailed in your piece to great detail, pretty much every execution right now is in some shape or fashion going outside of the written letter of the law to get done. And that's just the fact it is right now. So if I'm going to be morally consistent, even if I understand that we should have a death penalty in some ways, you can't do the right thing the wrong way. So just the morality of it not being done correctly brings us right back to this moral imperative of we have to fix this system or we need to not do it until we get it fixed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because as of right now, we are operating outside of the law just to get these executions done. I mean, with the state's regulations, even the federal regulations, they're just shrouded in secrecy. We don't know what's being done. We don't know where they're getting these chemicals from because they've been outlawed by the government to be imported from other countries. So, at this point, we're operating illegally to keep these executions going. And by going, Oklahoma's on pace to execute 2 people, I think, a month at this point. And they have continuously been in the media for botched executions as well.
Yeah, Finesse Moreno-Rivera joining us. There are 26 states that have secrecy protocols surrounding how executions are done and the people that are involved. This is where we get from the morality. We can get into some regulation here because this is a government operation. It's a law enforcement function. I understand there needs to be protections of the executioner. The old trope about the executioner having the hood over his head, right? Like, okay, the executioner needs some protection and they need some privacy and they need some anonymity. I don't know that needs to extend to every single person involved, though, because it sure seems to me when we're looking at these, how do you have accountability? How do you make sure training standards are up to snuff? How do you make sure they're properly trained and know the procedures ahead of time? Because this is one of those things, look, you're only getting one shot at these things. Like, this isn't like something like, oh, we'll just do it again tomorrow if it doesn't work, right? You're there for the duration. And like you had this horrific botched execution that took 3 hours. does these secrecy laws need to be looked at, or at least look at the procedures and go like, okay, one or two people need anonymity, but the rest of y'all, we need to have some accountability here?
Absolutely. To me, there should only be at the most two people within the room. There shouldn't be more than that. And everyone should have a reason as to why they are, whether that's the warden and then a doctor, preferably a doctor, but then that's it. There should be some type of accountability, because then to me, you're also just shrouding in secrecy your own morals and your own value. You're just hiding behind something because you maybe you're just scared to admit it to yourself. Maybe you're scared just to admit it to the people who you work with, your family, your friends, society as a whole. There's no reason why these regulations should not be transparent, and the fact that they're not just again goes to show that something just isn't right.
Yeah. Finesse Moreno-Rivera joining us. You talk about the Eighth Amendment. It has pretty vague language in this regard. That's not unusual in the Constitution. It has a lot of vague language in it because the idea was, well, this is the overarching thing, and then you states go figure it out and make legislation for it. So in and of itself, that's not an evil, but there is room for legislative fixes here. We're not going to change the Eighth Amendment. That's not going to happen. What legislative fixes should be worked towards here? Even a state that wants to have the death penalty, what should be some of the things they're working for? Should it be the FDA gap where the FDA is no longer regulating the drugs? Should it be the medical staff that's involved that actually physically does these, like some kind of a specific training for them, since most doctors won't do it? Do you whatever that may be? Is it a law enforcement fix on the system that gets them there? What's some of the legislative things? Because that's an attainable goal that we should be working towards.
Oh goodness, there's so many. So if we were to start at the very beginning, let's just look at how states' judicial systems are set up. So a perfect example, Andrew, you mentioned earlier Texas, because they are way ahead of any other state. I believe it's Texas for, and then Virginia for the most executions. The reason why Texas, for multiple reasons besides racial disparities, has such a high number of executions is predominantly based upon how its judicial system is set up. So number one being they have elected officials, and those elected officials are going to really be the voice box for, the population, which for Texas, they have a lot of proponents for death penalty. Number two would be that they don't have a public defense system set up. So whenever someone who can't afford an attorney has a capital case and they're sentenced to death, they are using a court-appointed attorney who may not have or may not be as seasoned with, capital offense cases, such as working with someone who's been on the, about to go on the death penalty, they're overworked, list goes on. But, another interesting thing too, is it wasn't until the 90s that Texas allowed for jurors to consider mitigating evidence. Mitigating evidence, as we all know, is a huge factor, because that's, including things such as your mental health or anything from your youth. I know that the Florida shooter, there's a case going on right now, or excuse me, a trial, and a lot of proponents who are, opponents against the death penalty are saying, look at his background, look at his youth. His mother drank a lot. He has a lot of mental health issues. So definitely number one, you look at the state and how its judicial system is set up. So Texas is a perfect example. Number two, just getting the FDA involved. And I know that goes really against their oath of protecting the United States citizens. But at the same time, someone needs to be regulating these drugs that are being utilized. Number three, bring in scientists, bring in doctors. There should be scientists who are coming up with these quote unquote cocktails that are being utilized to execute individuals. There haven't been. They are literally just these individuals who work for these prisons and just come up with and say, oh, I think X, Y, and Z would work because this will stop the heart, this will stop the breathing. And we know that there's no science that's backing all of this, but these combination of drugs. And like you mentioned earlier, not one thing is going to work for everyone. Everyone's different. Also making sure that, we're keeping out, foreign imports, making sure that we're making, having a really tight hold on regulations about what's being used. So there's so many things that need to be done. And also standardizing protocols. There is no standardized protocol, which to me is just insane, thinking about we're actually executing someone and there's no protocol for it. Everything's different. Whatever, it's kind of like whatever they say goes. And there's just so much that needs to be done policy wise that it's almost like, where do you start?
Well, our friends that are against the death penalty in total will look at you and throw their hands up and say some very unnice words and go, well, that's why you ban it. That's going to be their answer to that question.
Right.
Is there a refutation to that other than the 30 minutes we just spent talking about it?
I would like to see it banned, but at the same time, it goes back to that moral values. It goes back to religion. It goes back to politics. And it also goes back to, I sincerely can say that I have never lost anyone close to me and been in the position of knowing that and it's like the perpetrator is sentenced to death. I can't sit here and say that my mind wouldn't change if it wasn't my mother, my father, or a family member. I don't know, but at this time, what I feel is that if we're going to do it, then we better be following the letter of the law. We better be doing it the way that we should be doing it. Because if we're not, then what's the point? Then we're just killing someone.
Yeah. Finesse Moreno-Rivera, you do all this research on an analysis on the justice system. We have to bring this up because I think it's only fair to discuss this. There is a large strain of thought when it comes to the death penalty that even the people that do some of the more heinous crimes, heinous, that's not a word, even some of the folks that do the most heinous crimes, people will say, look, most of those people, it wasn't their first offense. It was multiple offenses. The system creates them. And now we're going to use the system to kill what the system created. I don't go quite that far with it, although I'm empathetic to some of that in certain circumstances. I don't think you can broad brush it that far. But that's something a lot of people feel, especially people who are basically, career institutionalized criminals who've spent most of these folks on death row have spent most of their lives in prison because of how long it takes. What about that argument? Because you've done the data on this, those people, I think the average in death row is, decades. What do you say to that? Of like, look, we're creating criminals to kill something we ourselves created. That's immoral in and of itself. I don't necessarily describe to that, but I understand the argument.
I understand the argument too, but I'm with you. You just can't make that broad stroke. You just can't. You honestly can't. I mean, we definitely created. We are a society who we punish rather than empower and help and intervene. But at the same time, I don't think that I can completely agree with that.
Is talking about the death penalty as punishment one of those things that's a linguistic thing we should stop doing? Because it's not really a punishment, it's an intervention. You're not punishing them, you're killing them. That's the end. That's a period. That's there's nothing after that. Should we be changing the language, how we discuss these sorts of things? Is it a nomenclature problem on top of everything else where we're still talking about it like it's the Wild West and we're hanging people? When this is really almost, I hate to say sanitized because you're still taking somebody's life, but it's years of courtroom and it's such a long process now. Do we need to just change how we talk about it altogether?
Absolutely. I think that we all need to just sit down and be honest with each other and, say what it is. You are taking someone's life. You are killing someone at the end of the day. This is what we're doing. I mean, it's a long process. I mean, that takes a lot of money. And, on top of that, we're not even really sanitizing anything. We still have rampant crime. We're still, sending people to the chair. That's an old nomenclature, right? It's not an intervention. It's not sanitizing anything. We still have criminals, every single day doing horrible things, and it's not deterring them. I mean, there's plenty of research that's out there that's saying it's not a deterrence. We are literally just killing someone just to say an eye for an eye. That's what this is.
Yeah. This is one of the harder topics to discuss because it's life and death, and it's life and death with government sanctioning, which is really hard to get into the morality of it. But Finesse Moreno-Rivera, I so enjoy having you on. We're going to do a long form on this because there's a whole piece to this on the medical side that we just kind of brushed by, but we really need to get into because there's a lot of ethics and things that go into that, and there's a lot of government regulation that needs to be fixed in that. So we're going to have you back. We're going to do a long form on this topic because there's so much to do on this. And I want to read up on a few things before I get into it because you're a lot smarter than I am. So I want to do some research and be boned up for it. But we're definitely having you back. Can you let folks know where they can follow you and keep up with what you're doing between now and they get to see you again on Heard Tell until we get you back, my friend?
Of course. Thank you, Andrew. Recently, I created a Twitter account so I can be found at Finesse Moreno. And then also, I can always be followed on my LinkedIn, where I continuously upload any articles that I have completed through Young Voices.
Fantastic. And I'm going to get you on Twitter Supper Club. We got to get you involved on that. Because that's one of the great things on Twitter is us doing our food stuff all the time. So maybe you can start Twitter Orchid Club or something. You can do that with all your lovely orchids back there, which is why we really have you on the show so we can look at your orchids. We kid. You do great work. We greatly appreciate you. She's also a Young Voices contributor. You can see all her stuff on her page. Let's do a lighter topic next time because I always enjoy talking to you. But you do criminality. This is what you do.
I know, it's so funny. My fiance recently said, why can't you just write about something happy and good? So I think I'll be doing something on prison reform here soon. So hopefully next time you have me on, I'll be talking about some good things that have been happening within the criminal justice realm.
We all need some good news too. So that'll be great. Finesse Moreno-Rivera, you are fantastic, madam. Thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Grainger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.